Step out of the vehicle. Now! Officer Mark Sullivan's voice sliced through the air, sharp and full of suspicion, as his hand hovered over his gun, in the middle of Chicago's Magnificent Mile parking lot. All eyes turned toward a black man standing beside a gleaming 1965 red Ford Mustang. I said, "Step away from the car." "Don't make me repeat myself," Sullivan barked again, his tone louder this time, his face flushed with the confidence of authority mixed with prejudice. The man he was yelling at didn't flinch. His name was Jordan Hayes, 42 years old, calm, composed, and, though Sullivan didn't know it yet, one of the FBI's most decorated agents, he had no idea that in just minutes, his own career would be over. Before we go into this story, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in justice, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. Jordan had only stopped for a moment to grab a coffee before an urgent FBI meeting on cybersecurity. It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday afternoon, just another day. But for Officer Sullivan, the sight of a black man behind the wheel of a pristine vintage Mustang screamed one thing: stolen. His instincts weren't based on evidence, but bias, the same kind that had tainted his 18 years on the force. 3 profiling complaints, 2 excessive force suspensions. But none of that mattered to him now. All he saw was color and assumption. "Whose car is this?" he demanded. Jordan, dressed neatly in a dark blazer and slacks, held his coffee calmly and replied, "It's mine. Registered under Jordan R. Hayes." His voice was steady, the kind that carried authority without arrogance. Yet Sullivan sneered. "That's a funny coincidence," he muttered. "Circling the car. A car like this doesn't belong to someone like you." Those words, "someone like you," hit with the weight of centuries. Jordan didn't respond. He'd heard it before. At 18, he'd been pulled over in this same city, accused of stealing his own car back then, too. That day, his father, James Hayes, a veteran Chicago police officer, had told him, "Son, keep your composure. They can take your rights in a second, but never let them take your dignity." Today, that memory kept him grounded. He reached for his wallet slowly, narrating every motion, a trained professional aware of every risk. "I'm going to show you the registration. Don't you move!" Sullivan barked, drawing his weapon halfway out. The crowd gasped. Phones rose into the air. A mother shielded her child. One voice in the distance shouted, "He didn't do anything." But Sullivan wasn't listening. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from arrogance. "I know this type," he muttered under his breath. "Always slick, always lying." Jordan raised both hands slightly, voice firm but calm. "Officer, please, check the plate number before you escalate this." The license plate gleamed under the sunlight. JRH 1965, his father's initials and birth year. That car wasn't just a car. It was legacy. A restored memory from a man who'd served the same department that was now pointing a gun at his son. A few feet away, Clara Jenkins, an elderly black woman holding grocery bags, froze as she recognized him. "Jordan Hayes?" she said, stepping closer. "James's boy? Lord, that's James's son." She dropped her bags and waved frantically. "Officer, I know this man. His father worked 30 years for CPD." But Sullivan snapped back. "Ma'am, step away from the suspect." Clara's voice cracked with outrage. "Suspect? That's an FBI agent, you fool!" The crowd grew louder now, a dozen phones recording, whispers turning to shouts. "Let him go! This is racism!" Sullivan's radio crackled, but he ignored it, fixated on asserting dominance. "Put your hands where I can see them!" he yelled again, stepping closer, his finger brushing the trigger guard. Jordan's phone buzzed. Special Agent in Charge Emily Chen flashing on the screen. He didn't dare move to answer it. Not yet. His meeting was in 15 minutes, but this was no longer about time. This was about survival. "Officer," Jordan said slowly, You are detaining a federal agent without cause. Sullivan scoffed. Federal agent? Right. And I'm the mayor. The words dripped with sarcasm as he smirked at the crowd. Show me your ID. If you even have one. You'll get it when you lower your weapon, Jordan replied. Until then, this is an unlawful stop. Sullivan took a step closer. You threatening me? No, Jordan said evenly. I'm reminding you of the law. The crowd murmured with awe for the first time. Sullivan hesitated. His authority was crumbling under the gaze of dozens of lenses. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down. Back up in 5 minutes. He mumbled into his shoulder mic. Possible stolen vehicle. Armed suspect. Jordan's patience was wearing thin, but his training kept him controlled. Armed suspect? He repeated. You just lied on your own radio. Sullivan didn't respond. Clara, furious now, shouted toward the officers pulling up. He's innocent. That man's an FBI agent. I worked with his daddy. Her words carried weight. 35 years in the department made her a familiar voice, but Sullivan's bias was louder than reason. Ma'am, one more step and you'll be detained too. You go ahead, she said fearlessly. But the city will know your name before sunset. Sullivan's jaw clenched. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Jordan caught it. You don't want to do this, he said softly. Not today. The tension hung thick in the air. A single wrong move could ignite disaster. Across the lot, a teenager live-streamed the scene, the title flashing across the screen. Black man stopped for stealing his own car. Within seconds, hundreds were watching. Officer Sullivan had no idea his every move was being broadcast across social media, but Jordan knew. He also knew that no badge, no rank, and no years of service could protect someone from the truth once it was on camera. And as Sullivan stood there, breathing heavy, finger twitching near the trigger, Jordan looked him straight in the eyes and said, You're making the worst mistake of your career. Those words, spoken with quiet certainty, hung in the wind like a prophecy, and within minutes, they would come true. Officer Sullivan's voice cracked with anger as he barked into his radio. Dispatch, I need immediate backup at Magnificent Mile Plaza. Possible stolen vehicle. Suspect refusing orders. His tone was deliberately urgent, painting Jordan as a threat when all he'd done was stand still. The tension felt electric, coiling tighter with each passing second. Jordan, hands raised, tried to reason calmly. Officer, there's no reason for backup. I've complied with everything. Just run the plate. Sullivan's hand trembled near his gun, but his pride refused to let him step back. You think I'm stupid? Guys like you always have an excuse, he said, pacing with short, angry strides. You think a nice suit and smooth talk will fool me? Jordan looked directly at him, voice low but steady. No, I think your fear is fooling you. That single line hit harder than a shout. Sullivan's eyes flared with humiliation. Don't test me, he snapped, and in one motion, he yanked his gun fully from the holster. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Mothers pulled their children close. Others yelled in disbelief. He's unarmed! What are you doing? Someone screamed. Clara Jenkins, still near the curb, pressed her hand to her chest, tears in her eyes. Lord have mercy, don't let this be another name in the headlines, she whispered. Jordan kept his voice even, fighting to stay composed. I'm not resisting. Officer, my badge and registration are in my jacket pocket. You can take them yourself. But Sullivan wasn't listening. His judgment clouded by a lifetime of unchallenged authority and bias. Hands where I can see them, he barked again. Though Jordan hadn't moved an inch, every word, every breath carried the weight of suspicion that no training could erase. In that moment, Jordan realized something chilling. Sullivan didn't just see a suspect, he saw a threat to his control, a man who challenged the comfort of his prejudice behind the police cruiser. Sergeant Lisa Ramirez pulled up, stepping out with calm authority. Her eyes darted between the officer's drawn weapon and the motionless man before him. "Mark! What's going on?" she demanded. "Why is your gun out?" Sullivan shot her a glare. "Don't question me. Lisa, this guy's hiding something." "Hiding what?" she countered sharply. "All I see is a man standing still." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "You going soft on me now? Don't betray me over some stranger." Ramirez took a cautious step forward, her instincts as a cop clashing with her conscience as a human being. "Mark, put it down. Look at his stance. Look at the crowd. This is bad optics, bad policing." But Sullivan only grew louder. "You think I care about optics? I care about staying alive," he shouted. The crowd's anger grew with every word. Dozens of phones captured the chaos, the images already spreading online, in a nearby cafe window. Screens flickered with live streams as people murmured, "He's got his gun out again?" That's Sullivan, the one from the Maplewood case. Jordan recognized the name. He'd read that report. Sullivan had once stopped a Latino teenager on suspicion of theft. The boy had been innocent, traumatized, and the case buried under bureaucracy. Now that same officer was repeating history, only this time, the world was watching. Jordan took a slow breath. "Officer, I'm going to de-escalate this. I am a federal agent. My ID is inside my jacket pocket." Sullivan sneered. "Federal agent? Sure you are. That's what every liar says." Ramirez spoke firmly. "Let him show you the ID. If you're right, we confirm it. If you're wrong, you apologize." Sullivan's hand twitched, the grip on his gun tightening. "Don't you start giving me orders." Ramirez held her ground. "You're pointing a gun at a calm man in front of 100 witnesses. Don't make this worse." Sullivan's ego flared. "You're either with me or against me." That was the moment Ramirez realized the truth. Her partner wasn't protecting the law. He was protecting his pride. Inside Jordan's mind. The years of FBI negotiation training kicked in. He lowered his tone to something deliberate, measured. "You want control? Fine. I'll give you control. Check the car's registration. It's in your system. JRH 1965, registered to Jordan Hayes." Sullivan froze for a moment, uncertain, then barked to the rookie officer arriving at the scene. "Run the plate!" The young officer nodded, typing into his onboard computer. The silence stretched. Seconds ticked like hours. Then came the result. "It's clean, sir. Registered to a Jordan R. Hayes." Sullivan's face drained of color, but his pride refused surrender. Could be forged. He muttered, "These people know how to play the system." Ramirez's patience snapped. "These people?" she repeated, her voice hard as steel. "You hear yourself. Mark, this isn't policing, it's prejudice." The crowd roared in agreement. Jordan, still calm, lowered his hand slightly. "Sergeant Ramirez, thank you. May I show my badge now?" "Go ahead," she said, nodding carefully. Sullivan tried to intervene, but Ramirez blocked him with a firm hand. Enough. Jordan slowly reached into his jacket, every motion deliberate. He pulled out a black leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it toward her. The golden emblem of the FBI glinted in the sunlight. Gasps swept through the crowd again, this time mixed with murmurs of outrage and disbelief. "He really is FBI," someone shouted. "Oh my God, he's an agent!" Ramirez stared at the badge, her voice quiet but certain. "It's real." Sullivan's world tilted. His authority, his assumptions, all of it collapsed in an instant. "No," he said weakly, shaking his head. "It can't be." "You're lying." "I don't need to lie," Jordan replied, his tone soft but cutting. "But you just did. Over the radio." The weight of that truth hit Sullivan like a blow. His hand shook, the gun still pointed but now unsteady. Clara stepped forward again, voice trembling with both anger and pride. "You see, officer, That's James Hayes's boy. His father bled for this city, and now his son's bleeding for your pride." Sullivan's eyes flickered, caught between guilt and rage. "I didn't know," he whispered, almost to himself. Ramirez glared. "That's the problem, Mark. You never wanted to know." Jordan kept his gaze steady, his tone quiet but commanding. "Holster your weapon. Officer, this is over. For a moment." Sullivan hesitated. Then, with a trembling sigh, he slowly lowered the gun. The crowd erupted in cheers and relief, but Jordan didn't celebrate. He simply looked at the man before him and said, "You just broadcasted your prejudice to the whole city." And as the flashing lights of additional squad cars reflected off the Mustang's red paint, Officer Mark Sullivan finally realized. He hadn't just drawn his weapon on a black man, he had drawn it on the truth that would destroy his career within minutes. The plaza had transformed into a live spectacle of chaos and disbelief. A ring of onlookers had formed around the scene, phones lifted high like torches, each recording history in real time. "He's FBI!" someone shouted, but others were too stunned to believe it. The tension was thick, pressing down on everyone like heavy air before a storm. Officer Mark Sullivan stood rigid, his face pale, gun still trembling as if it hadn't yet realized the danger was gone. He muttered to himself, "They always pull this stunt," unable to accept the truth staring him in the face. Beside him, Sergeant Lisa Ramirez took charge, stepping forward with authority. "Mark, lower your weapon. Now," she said firmly. Her voice cut through the noise, carrying the weight of reason. "You're already on camera, and every second you delay is another nail in your coffin." Sullivan's pride cracked, but his defiance remained. "You don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped. "I'm maintaining control." "Control?" Ramirez shot back. "You lost that the moment you aimed at an innocent man. The rookie, Officer Kyle Thompson, fidgeted nervously nearby. His voice was barely a whisper. "Sir, maybe we should verify his credentials." Sullivan glared at him, his temper simmering. "You want to lose your badge on your first year?" But Kyle, young and idealistic, couldn't ignore the truth unfolding before him. He glanced at Jordan, who stood perfectly still, composed even as humiliation burned quietly behind his calm eyes. Kyle swallowed hard and murmured, "He's not lying. He's too calm for that." Clara Jenkins stepped closer again, clutching her handbag tightly. "Mark Sullivan," she said, her voice shaking with righteous anger. "I've known your supervisor since before you had your first patrol. You think this will disappear? Every camera here caught what you did." Sullivan's eyes darted to the crowd. Nearly 100 people now, their phones aimed like mirrors reflecting his disgrace. "Step back. All of you!" he yelled. But no one moved. A young woman in a denim jacket called out, "No! You step back! He didn't do anything!" Her words struck a nerve, drawing applause and shouts of support. Another voice shouted, "This is Chicago! Man, not the 1950s!" The moment had shifted. The power Sullivan once wielded through his badge was gone, dissolved in public outrage. Ramirez glanced toward the rookie and gave him a quiet signal. "Run that plate again," she ordered. "Double confirm ownership." Kyle nodded and moved quickly to the squad car. He typed in the license, JRH1965, and within seconds, the same result appeared, registered to Special Agent Jordan R. Hayes. Ramirez turned back, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "Confirmed. The car is legally his." The crowd erupted in cheers and angry exclamations. Sullivan's lips tightened. He looked cornered, like a man whose lies had caught up faster than his mind could spin. "No," he said stubbornly. "It could be fake. These government types, they forge things." Clara scoffed. "Forged? Honey, your ego's the only fake thing here." Her voice carried the sting of truth that made Sullivan's face redden with humiliation. Jordan remained silent, but his eyes said everything: disappointment, exhaustion, and the quiet pain of knowing how familiar this moment felt. Ramirez noticed it too. "Agent Hayes," she said softly. "I'm sorry this happened. Don't apologize for him," Jordan replied. "He represents a system, not a mistake." Those words rippled through the crowd, a sobering reminder that this wasn't just about one man with a gun. It was about all the unseen moments that never made it to video. At that instant, a news van pulled up. Jennifer Lee, a young reporter from WGN, stepped out with her cameraman. "We're live," she whispered into her mic. "Ongoing confrontation at Magnificent Mile involving alleged racial profiling by CPD officer Mark Sullivan." Her words traveled fast. Within minutes, the story spread online. Mustang incident trending across platforms. Ramirez knew what that meant. There would be no covering this up. She turned to Sullivan, her tone sharp. "You need to holster that weapon and call your supervisor, now." He refused, shaking his head. "I'm not letting some crowd tell me how to handle a situation." "Mark," Ramirez said coldly, "the situation is handling you." The rookie, nervous but emboldened, added quietly, "Sir, she's right." Sullivan's chest rose and fell, his authority crumbling. "You're all turning on me? After everything I've done for this department?" "You've done enough," Ramirez said. "Too much. Maybe." Meanwhile, Jennifer Lee's camera zoomed in on Jordan, who stood with quiet dignity, the sunlight glinting off his badge. "Agent Hayes," she called. "Do you want to make a statement?" Jordan looked at her for a moment before replying. "This isn't about me. It's about how easily a man with power can abuse it and how quickly people excuse it. Until they see it on video." The crowd fell silent. Even Sullivan's breath caught. He had no comeback for truth that sharp. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder, multiple units approaching. Sullivan's backup had arrived, but so had the end of his illusion of control. Clara stepped aside as several officers formed a perimeter, one of them whispering to Ramirez. "Commissioner Kane is on his way. He's seen the video." Ramirez nodded, glancing at Sullivan with quiet pity. "It's over," she said. "You should start thinking about what you'll tell him." Sullivan's hand trembled as he finally reholstered his gun, the gesture hollow, almost symbolic. His authority was gone, stripped by his own arrogance. The rookie looked away, ashamed. The crowd began to chant, voices echoing through the plaza. "Justice now! Justice now!" Ramirez exhaled, turning to Jordan. "Are you all right, Agent Hayes?" He nodded faintly. "I'm fine, but fine shouldn't mean surviving a mistake that never should have happened." His words lingered like an echo, quiet but unforgettable. The cameras captured every second, his composure, his calm strength, and Sullivan's unraveling face. It was more than a scene, it was a statement. The plaza, once just a place for shopping and laughter, had become the stage where truth met accountability. And as Commissioner Kane's black SUV pulled up, the crowd parted, the next chapter of justice about to begin. Commissioner Robert Kane stepped out of his black SUV, his expression firm and unreadable, the weight of the department pressing on his shoulders. The moment he arrived, the noise of the crowd softened into a heavy silence, as if everyone instinctively knew this was the man whose word would decide what happened next. "What in God's name is going on here?" he asked, voice steady but laced with controlled anger. Officer Sullivan tried to speak first, his tone defensive and shaky. "Sir, it's not what it looks like. The suspect." Kane cut him off sharply. "You mean the FBI agent?" His words hit like a slap. Sullivan froze, color draining from his face. The commissioner turned toward Jordan Hayes, who stood tall and calm beside his red Mustang. "Agent Hayes," Kane said, extending a hand. "I'm Commissioner Robert Kane." I want to personally apologize for what just took place here. Jordan nodded, shaking his hand firmly. Apologies are a start, Commissioner, but they don't erase what could have happened. His tone was respectful, yet edged with truth. I understand, Kane replied. And trust me, there will be consequences. He turned to Sullivan, eyes burning with quiet fury. You've crossed the line for the last time. The crowd murmured. Even Sullivan's fellow officers looked uneasy. Sullivan tried to defend himself. Voice trembling. Sir, I had probable cause. Probable cause? Kane interrupted. You pointed a gun at an unarmed federal agent because of the color of his skin and the car he was driving? That's not cause, that's bias. And you just broadcast it to the entire city. His voice rose, echoing through the plaza. Do you have any idea how bad this looks for this department? For every honest cop trying to rebuild trust? Sullivan's eyes darted between the commissioner and the cameras. It was a misunderstanding, he said weakly. Kane stepped closer, his voice now low and cutting. 3 complaints for racial profiling, 2 disciplinary actions for excessive force, and you still learned nothing. Tell me, what part of that is a misunderstanding? Sullivan stammered. I thought I was protecting the community. By humiliating one of its protectors? Kane shot back. That man has more integrity in 1 hour than you've shown in your entire career. The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of approval. Clara Jenkins, standing near the front, crossed her arms with a faint, proud smile. Told you. Mark, she muttered. Didn't I tell you who he was? Commissioner Kane looked to Ramirez. Sergeant, you witnessed everything? She nodded. Yes, sir. He escalated without cause. I tried to stop him. And the plate? Kane asked. Confirmed, Ramirez said firmly. Registered to Agent Jordan R. Hayes. Legal. No outstanding issues. Kane turned to Sullivan. Then why is your report calling him a suspect? Sullivan hesitated, voice weak. I made a mistake. No, Kane said sharply. You made a choice. He turned to the rookie officer. Kyle Thompson. Son, did you record any of this? Kyle nodded nervously. Yes, sir. My body cam was on from the start. Kane's jaw tightened. Good. That footage will go directly to Internal Affairs and the U.S. Attorney's Office by midnight. The color drained from Sullivan's face as he realized how far this had gone. Sir, please, this could ruin me. You did that yourself, Kane said coldly. You're suspended effective immediately. Badge, weapon, now. The plaza fell completely silent. Sullivan's hands shook as he unpinned his badge, the sound of metal against fabric echoing like judgment. He handed over his gun next, eyes glossy with the weight of finality. Jordan watched quietly, not gloating, not smiling, just reflecting. He had seen arrogance break men before, but seeing it happen in the open carried a strange kind of sadness. Commissioner, he said finally, this isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that allows it to keep happening. Kane nodded gravely. You're right, Agent Hayes, and it's going to change. Then make sure it does. Jordan replied, because next time, the man standing here might not live long enough to prove his innocence. Those words landed like a hammer, pulling a hush over the entire plaza for a moment. Even Sullivan looked away, unable to face the truth. The commissioner straightened his coat and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. For the record, I want every citizen here to know. No one, I repeat, no one is above accountability, including the men who wear this badge. Justice doesn't stop at the uniform. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing off nearby buildings. Jennifer Lee from WGN stepped closer with her microphone. Commissioner Kane, can we confirm that disciplinary action is being taken right now? You can report, he said clearly. That officer, Mark Sullivan, has been suspended pending federal review for misconduct, racial profiling, and endangering a federal agent. The Chicago Police Department does not tolerate discrimination under my command." The applause grew louder. Ramirez exchanged a brief look with Jordan, one of quiet respect. She had chosen justice over loyalty, and he recognized that courage. Sullivan, meanwhile, stood hollow-eyed, muttering under his breath. 18 years, gone just like that. Clara turned toward him, her tone almost soft but firm. 18 years of the wrong lessons. "Baby, maybe it's time you learn the right ones." Jordan took a slow breath, his mind flashing to his father. James Hayes had worn the same uniform once, had believed in justice the way others believed in faith. Jordan imagined what his father would think of this scene. Anger, pride, sorrow, all mixed into one. Kane placed a hand on his shoulder. "Agent Hayes, I'd like to request your cooperation in a formal review. We'll need your statement for the internal investigation." "Of course," Jordan said. "I'll provide everything, but I'll also provide something else." "Data." "Data?" Kane asked. "On racial profiling," Jordan explained. "Your own department's numbers. Black drivers are stopped 18.5% more often than white drivers, despite equal crime rates in those areas. That's not policing. That's pattern." The commissioner exhaled slowly, knowing he couldn't deny the truth. "Then we'll face it head on," he said. "And you have my word. This city will start changing." The cameras captured their handshake, one representing the old system trying to reform, the other the new spirit of justice rising to challenge it. Behind them, the crowd began to chant Jordan's name softly, not as a hero, but as a symbol. Jennifer Lee turned to her cameraman, whispering, "We just witnessed history." But for Jordan, it wasn't history. It was a reminder of how fragile dignity could be, and how important it was to protect it. As the commissioner led Sullivan away in handcuffs, Jordan stood quietly beside his father's Mustang, the late afternoon sun glinting off the chrome, for the first time that day. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. Justice hadn't won completely, but it had begun. The crowd began to thin as officers restored order, but the emotional weight lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Commissioner Robert Kane stood beside Jordan Hayes near the red Mustang, both men silent for a long moment. The flashing lights reflected on the chrome, alternating red and blue, painting the scene like a living symbol of justice and injustice intertwined. "Agent Hayes," Kane finally said, voice heavy, "I'll be forwarding every bit of this to Internal Affairs and the DOJ. This department has a long road ahead." Jordan nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "That road starts today. Commissioner, this can't just be another viral story that fades by Monday. It won't be." Kane replied, "Not under my watch." Behind them, Mark Sullivan sat in the back of a patrol car, hands cuffed, eyes distant. The weight of humiliation and fear pressed against him like invisible chains. His mind raced through fragments of his career, commendations, late-night calls, high-speed chases, and yet none of that mattered now. What defined him were his worst choices, the ones driven not by duty but by prejudice. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he whispered to himself, as though hoping someone would hear and absolve him, but no one did. Sergeant Lisa Ramirez approached Jordan with paperwork in hand. "Internal Affairs wants your preliminary statement," she said softly. "We can take it downtown or right here if you prefer." "Here is fine," Jordan answered. "The truth doesn't need an office." She nodded respectfully and began documenting his account, while the crowd's remaining voices echoed faintly in the background. Clara Jenkins stayed close, her hand resting on Jordan's shoulder. "Your father would have been proud." "Son," she said warmly, "he always said justice runs in your blood." Jordan gave a small, bittersweet smile. He also said justice doesn't come easy. He was right about that. Clara sighed. But look around. People saw it this time. They saw the truth. Jennifer Lee, the WGN reporter, stepped forward with her cameraman, careful not to intrude too abruptly. "Agent Hayes," she said, "before you leave, can we get a comment for our viewers? The city's watching." Jordan looked at her, weary but determined. "Tell them this. Today wasn't just about me or one officer. It's about a culture that lets suspicion replace respect. It's about every man or woman who's been stopped, questioned, or threatened just for existing in the wrong color skin. I'm alive to tell my story, but too many aren't. That has to change." The reporter's eyes softened as she lowered her mic. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's going to hit people." Commissioner Kane turned toward Ramirez. "Sergeant, I want a full report on Sullivan's record by tonight, and a recommendation for disciplinary reform in the morning. We've ignored too many warning signs." "Yes, sir," she replied. "And Commissioner," Jordan added, "make sure your reform includes more than punishment. Include education, data, accountability, real numbers, real change. That's the only way this stops." Kane nodded slowly. "I'll see to it personally." Then, as if remembering the chaos of the day, he sighed. "It's ironic, isn't it? My own mother, Clara Jenkins, was the one who called me here. I had no idea she was calling about you." Jordan blinked, momentarily surprised, then turned toward Clara. "You're his mother?" She smiled proudly. "That's right. He might run the department, but I still tell him what's right." Kane chuckled softly, the first hint of levity all afternoon. "And, as usual." "She was right," he said. "You deserved better. Agent Hayes, I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure it never happens again." "Then do it," Jordan replied simply. "Not for me, but for the next man who won't have a badge to defend himself." The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the plaza. The once hostile scene had turned somber, reflective, almost sacred. Sullivan was escorted out of the car by internal affairs officers, his wrists still cuffed. As he was led past Jordan, he hesitated. "Agent Hayes," he said softly, his voice barely audible. I didn't know." Jordan looked him in the eye, his voice steady. "That's exactly the problem. You never wanted to." Sullivan's shoulders slumped as the officers guided him away. The image of a fallen cop walking past the man he wronged would become the defining photograph on tomorrow's front pages. Jennifer Lee's voice narrated live. "Officer Mark Sullivan has been taken into custody following a racially motivated confrontation with FBI Special Agent Jordan Hayes. Commissioner Kane has confirmed an internal investigation and a promise of systemic reform." Across the city, televisions flickered with the footage. Storefronts, cafes, homes, people watching in disbelief as truth unfolded before their eyes. Ramirez approached Jordan once more. "The press won't let this go. You just lit a fire under the city." "Good," Jordan said quietly. "It's time something burned away the rot." Kane stepped closer. "Agent Hayes, you'll be debriefed tomorrow at FBI headquarters. I'll coordinate with your director. You have my full cooperation." "I appreciate that," Jordan replied. "But I have an urgent meeting I still haven't made. I was on my way to it before all this started." "Go," Kane said. "You've done enough for one day." Jordan gave a firm nod and turned toward his car. Clara stopped him briefly. "You sure you're all right, baby?" "I'm fine," he said softly. "Just tired of proving I belong." He opened the door of his father's Mustang and paused, looking around the plaza one last time. The same place where humiliation had nearly turned deadly now stood as a symbol of reckoning. Ramirez saluted him quietly. a small gesture of respect from one officer to another. Kane watched as Jordan drove away, the Mustang's engine humming low, its taillights fading into the city streets. He turned to Ramirez. "You think he'll forgive this department?" She shook her head. "Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't come before accountability." Kane exhaled slowly. "Then we start there." Hours later. As night fell over Chicago, news anchors replayed the footage with captions like "Justice on Camera" and "Racial Bias Exposed." The CPD's phone lines flooded with calls, protests, and demands for reform. Sullivan's name trended across the nation, his career in ruins, and somewhere in the city. Jordan finally walked into his delayed FBI meeting, 30 minutes late, but with a new purpose burning in his chest. He opened his laptop, looked around the conference room, and said, "Before we talk cybersecurity, let's talk about accountability, because no system is secure if its people aren't just..." Those in the room went silent, knowing they were witnessing more than a briefing. They were witnessing the beginning of something larger than one man's ordeal, a movement born not out of rage, but of resolve. 2 days later, Officer Mark Sullivan sat in a narrow interview room inside Chicago Police Headquarters, his eyes hollow, his hands clasped tight as if prayer might undo what he'd done. Across from him sat Special Agent Jordan Hayes and Commissioner Robert Kane. Both silent as internal affairs officers prepared the documentation. The atmosphere was thick, not of hatred, but of consequence. "Officer Sullivan," Kane began quietly, "you're facing 3 paths forward. You can take the formal route, criminal charges and termination, likely prison time. You can resign now, forfeiting your pension and any chance of returning to the force. Or," he paused, eyes fixed on him, "you can agree to cooperate with federal investigations, testify about systemic profiling, and complete a 2-year retraining program under DOJ supervision." The silence stretched. Sullivan swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "You're giving me a choice?" "No," Jordan said calmly. "We're giving you a chance." His tone carried no arrogance, just quiet truth. "You've destroyed trust, but if you want to build something from the wreckage, this is your last chance to do it." Sullivan looked down, tears gathering at the edge of his lashes. "I don't know why I did it," he whispered. "I grew up believing I was one of the good ones. My dad was a cop. He told me to watch out for trouble. Maybe I started seeing trouble everywhere." Jordan's gaze softened, though his words stayed firm. "You saw it in skin instead of actions, and it nearly cost you your soul. And my life." Sullivan nodded, trembling. "Then I'll do it. I'll take the retraining. I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Kane leaned back, exhaling. "Then you'll be transferred to the Bias Accountability Program under DOJ oversight starting next week. You'll sit through every testimony, every complaint, every story from the people this system failed." Sullivan's voice cracked again. "And after that?" "After that," Jordan replied quietly, "you live with the consequences and use them to teach others." Weeks passed. News of the Magnificent Mile incident continued to ripple across the nation. Protesters filled downtown streets demanding policy reform. City council meetings aired live, with citizens demanding bias audits, mandatory body cam reviews, and community oversight boards. Commissioner Kane announced new protocols. Every stop would require a written justification. All racial data logged for review. The city allocated $1.2 million for annual bias and empathy training. At the center of it all was Jordan Hayes. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward. He founded the James Hayes Foundation, named after his late father, to advocate for fair policing and data transparency. The foundation gathered national attention when Jordan revealed new statistics across America. Black drivers were stopped nearly 18.5% more often than white drivers, yet contraband was found less frequently in those searches. The numbers don't lie. He told a congressional committee, "Bias isn't opinion, it's measurable." Meanwhile, Sullivan began his reluctant transformation. At first, he sat through training sessions in silence, resisting every word about equity and empathy. But slowly, the stories of those he'd once dismissed began to chip away at his defenses. A single mother from the South Side described being pulled over for looking suspicious while rushing her child to the hospital. A young man told how a routine stop ended with a gun pointed at his head. Sullivan couldn't look away. One afternoon, after a session, he found Jordan waiting in the hallway. "You really think people like me can change?" Sullivan asked. Jordan folded his arms, considering the question carefully. "Only if you want to. Change isn't a headline. It's a choice you make every day." Sullivan nodded quietly, realizing that this wasn't forgiveness. It was responsibility. "I'll testify," he said. "Not for me. For them." Months later, in a packed federal hearing room, Sullivan took the stand. Cameras rolled as he told his story, not as an officer defending himself, but as a man confessing failure. "I profiled people because I was taught to fear what I didn't understand," he said, voice trembling. "But that fear isn't law enforcement, it's ignorance wearing a badge." The room fell silent. Jordan watched from the front row, his face unreadable but his eyes filled with something close to relief. The testimony went viral within hours, sparking headlines nationwide. "Racist officer admits bias, calls for reform." It was uncomfortable truth, but necessary truth. Commissioner Kane followed through on his promise. The Chicago Police Department launched the Justice Initiative, partnering with Jordan's foundation to introduce a new officer mentorship program. Sergeant Ramirez was promoted to captain, overseeing training reforms citywide. She insisted on one simple rule: every new recruit must complete a 40-hour empathy field course before receiving a badge. "Understanding the people you serve," she said, "is as vital as knowing how to use your weapon." Across the country, other states took notice. Within 6 months, 25 states passed versions of the Fair Policing and Transparency Act, inspired by the reforms sparked by that single moment in Chicago. Jordan's name appeared on advisory panels from Washington to Atlanta, but he never sought fame. In interviews, he always gave credit to others: his father, Clara Jenkins, Ramirez, even Sullivan. "We all played a role," he said in one segment, "some of us as warnings, some as lessons. But the goal is the same: justice without bias." Late one evening, as the city lights shimmered along Lake Michigan, Jordan sat in his office at the James Hayes Foundation. On his desk lay a letter, handwritten, smudged with ink. It was from Sullivan. "Agent Hayes, I know I'll never erase what I did. But last week, a young black recruit I mentored said something that stuck with me," he said. "I joined because I met a cop who admitted he was wrong." Maybe that's something worth holding on to. Thank you for not letting me walk away unchanged. Jordan read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his father's old badge case. He looked out the window, the city glowing below, and whispered softly, "Justice is more than punishment. It's understanding." And as the night stretched over Chicago, a new kind of peace settled. A quiet reminder that redemption doesn't begin when the noise fades. It begins when a man faces himself and decides never to repeat the silence that once protected his prejudice. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the Magnificent Mile, but the echoes of that day still rippled through Chicago and beyond. What began as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a national reckoning. Jordan Hayes, now appointed as senior advisor for federal policing reform under the Department of Justice, stood before a packed congressional chamber in Washington, D.C. The air was heavy with anticipation as he adjusted the microphone. Cameras rolled, reporters scribbled notes, and millions watched live. 6 months ago, Jordan began, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. An officer pointed a gun at me because he believed a black man couldn't own a classic car. That single moment wasn't just about one man's bias. It was about a system's blindness. But today, we stand on the other side of that moment, proving that accountability can build trust, not destroy it. The audience fell silent, hanging on every word. He went on to explain how the reforms born from that incident had reshaped departments across the nation. 25 states have implemented bias transparency laws. Every stop, every arrest, every complaint is now logged and reviewed through civilian oversight. We've made the first step toward a justice system that serves all, not just some. At the back of the chamber, Commissioner Robert Kane listened with quiet pride. Chicago had once been a headline for police misconduct. Now it was becoming a model of reform. He thought of his mother, Clara Jenkins, who sat beside him that day, tears glistening in her eyes as she whispered. James Hayes would be proud of that boy. Jordan continued. My father wore the same badge that once turned against me, but I refused to let his sacrifice be stained by silence. Justice isn't about vengeance, it's about transformation. Applause filled the room, but amid the cheers, one man sat alone in quiet reflection. Mark Sullivan, no longer an officer, his uniform replaced by a simple gray suit. He had traveled to Washington at Jordan's invitation. His face bore the marks of regret and time, but his eyes held something different now. Humility. When Jordan finished his address, the committee chair thanked him and called for the next speaker. To the surprise of many, Jordan gestured toward Sullivan. Before we conclude, he said, I'd like to introduce someone who represents what real change can look like. Not from power, but from repentance. Murmurs spread through the chamber as Sullivan approached the podium. He hesitated before speaking. I used to wear a badge with pride. He began softly, but pride without compassion is just arrogance in uniform. 6 months ago, I let my fear decide a man's worth. I drew my weapon on an innocent person because of the color of his skin. That moment destroyed everything I thought I was, but it also opened my eyes to what I could still become. The room was silent except for the sound of cameras clicking. Since then, Sullivan continued, I've worked with the James Hayes Foundation, teaching new recruits what not to become, every week. I stand before classrooms full of young officers and tell them that power means nothing without conscience. I've lost my career, my family, my reputation, but I've gained something I never had before. Understanding. He paused, voice breaking. Agent Hayes didn't forgive me to make me feel better. He gave me a chance to make sure my mistake doesn't happen again. When he stepped away, the applause was soft, respectful, not for redemption, but for honesty. Jordan approached him afterward, shaking his hand. You kept your promise, he said quietly. Sullivan nodded, still trying to earn it. The two men stood there for a long moment. One, a victim turned reformer, the other an oppressor turned witness, bound by the same pursuit of truth. That night, back in Chicago, the city glowed differently. Outside the James Hayes Foundation headquarters, a crowd gathered for its official opening ceremony. The sign gleamed under golden lights, justice through understanding. Clara Jenkins stood beside Jordan as the ribbon was cut, her hand trembling with emotion. Your father dreamed of something like this, she said softly. He always said, real justice starts when the law learns to listen. Then we'll keep it listening. Jordan replied, Reporters crowded around, microphones flashing. "Agent Hayes," one asked. "What's next for the foundation?" "Education," he said simply. "We'll train officers, support victims, collect data, and build community partnerships. Because justice shouldn't wait for tragedy. It should prevent it. Across town, in a modest community center. Mark Sullivan volunteered 3 nights a week, mentoring at-risk youth and speaking to police recruits. The work didn't erase his past, but it kept him accountable to it. Some nights, he stayed late, sweeping floors or handing out meals, quietly repeating to himself, "Bias ruined me, but truth rebuilt me." Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Ramirez led the CPD's new Fair Policing Unit, a diverse team focused on field audits, mental health support, and de-escalation strategies. In her first public report, she wrote, "We can't change history, but we can change culture, and that begins with humility." By December, the first annual Justice Data Report revealed measurable progress. Racial disparity in traffic stops had dropped by 22%. Civilian complaints were down, and officer satisfaction had risen for the first time in a decade. The city that once stood as a symbol of division had become a blueprint for reform. On the anniversary of the incident, Jordan visited the Magnificent Mile parking lot where it all began. The Mustang gleamed in the winter sun, the same car that had nearly cost him his life, now a symbol of endurance. A small memorial plaque stood nearby, commissioned by the city, "To every life threatened by bias and every soul redeemed by truth. May justice be our legacy." Jordan stood in silence for a while before Clara joined him. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "the crowd still talks about that day. They say it was the moment Chicago finally looked at itself. Then let's make sure it never looks away again," Jordan replied. As they left, a group of young recruits from the academy walked past, whispering to one another. One of them, a young black officer, saluted Jordan and said, "Sir, because of you, I joined to make a difference." Jordan smiled gently. "Then make it count." That evening, he sat at his desk in the Foundation's office, writing the final line of his father's memoirs, now to be published under the Foundation's banner. Justice is not a destination, but a constant choice, one we must renew every day. As he closed the book, the city skyline glimmered beyond the window in that quiet moment. He realized justice had not come through rage or revenge, but through resilience and reform. And while the scars of prejudice would never fully fade, they had given birth to something powerful, an awakening. Before turning off the lights, he whispered to himself, "We didn't just survive injustice, we turned it into purpose." And with that, Jordan Hayes, the man once profiled for driving his father's car, became the very embodiment of what his father had lived for, a reminder that even in a broken system, change is possible when courage replaces silence and truth finally finds its voice. Thank you for watching. If you believe in justice, like, share, and subscribe. Your voice makes change possible.